Hey, I'm Kit. This is my 2015 F12 Berlinetta. It is my 83rd car that I've owned in the past 29 years, and you're watching ANSWRD. All right, so the story of how I ended up choosing the F12 and how I got into this car. Well, I had owned a 718 Spyder right before this. I had a 991.2 GT3 PDK before that I was tracking. Before the GT3, I had a McLaren 600 LT, and then I had another 991.2 GT3 in manual before that. And then before that GT3, I'd owned two Ferrari Californias. I went looking for a naturally aspirated V12 when I was shopping for this car. I wanted a GT car, so I wanted something that was decently comfortable and a cruising car that was quiet, but also still fun to drive in the twisty roads. So I'd considered the Aston Martin DBS, I considered the last gen V12 Vantage, and a few of the other Aston Martins. Mostly I crossed those off the list because they were too old. I did drive the DBS, I just didn't love it. The turbo motor just doesn't deliver power in the way that I really wanted. It's fast, it's comfortable, it looks really nice, but it felt considerably heavier and considerably larger than the F12. It just wasn't nearly as fun to throw around. The Aston Martin was way more of a GT car than this is for me. While I did enjoy driving it, it didn't have the responsiveness that I was looking for out of a car. And then I also considered the Ferrari FF and GTC4Lusso, as well as this, because you can get those both with basically the same V12 motor. I really enjoy the FF. I like the fact that you can put people in it, but I just don't really like the way they look. And for me, if I'm gonna buy an expensive sports car, then it should be something I really like looking at when I go out to the garage. And the FF prices are up probably 20 or 30% over the past year, and it was just, I just didn't want to spend that much on an FF. The GTC4Lusso was a harder decision because it has the much more modern interior. They all come with CarPlay and better in-car entertainment system. They're much more modern inside. And they are slightly less expensive than an equivalent F12. The problem with the Lusso was that they weren't much less expensive. And while I like the looks better than the FF, I like the way the F12 looks better. Plus, the F12 is noticeably faster. The only way to get a rear-wheel drive Lusso is if you get the V8. And the V8 motor has the same problems that I've talked about the other turbo motors, is that it feels turboed. You can definitely tell. They're fast, they're fun to drive, but I really wanted a V12. And the only way you can get the V12 in the Lusso is with the all-wheel drive systems. The car is heavier, and it doesn't have as much power as the F12. So ended up with the F12, really enjoy it. Okay, so my favorite thing about the car, it's definitely the motor. You buy this car because of the motor, the naturally aspirated V12. There's just not many of them out there anymore that you can get this kind of responsiveness out of. And the beauty of a big naturally aspirated high revving motor like this is a few things. It sounds incredible. You get this really nice soundtrack. It gets louder and more intense the higher you rev it. The power delivery is just incredible. The worst thing about today's turbo motors is not the power they make, but it's the way they deliver power. It's very on-off. Even with all the tuning modern manufacturers have put through it, there's no excuse for having a throttle that is really binary. And the naturally aspirated V12 has such a nice ability to control the amount of power that you're putting out. You have very fine control of it over a long travel gas pedal. Love the way it puts out power. It makes good power from low RPMs all the way to redline. It sounds great while it's doing it, and it's very flexible. No peaks or valleys in the power delivery. It makes the car really predictable and fun for me to drive. My least favorite thing about this car, it sounds silly to say because I knew this going in, but it's the gas mileage. I mean, the car is rated at 11 miles to the gallon around the city and 16 on the highway, which you expect, but it's a 22-gallon gas tank, so you figure you'll be able to get a decent amount of range out of it. But a lot of the times I start the car up with a full tank of gas and it tells me I have less than 200 miles left to go, which means it's getting way worse than the rated city gas mileage, which isn't surprising. It's a big motor, makes lots of power, you use the power a lot. I'm not surprised, but getting less than 200 miles out of 22 gallons of gas that costs like 120 bucks, it makes you think about driving the car a little bit. So my car is currently stock. and it'll probably stay that way. I used to modify everything on cars. I have a long history of playing with cars, and I just don't do it as much anymore. That said, there are a couple things that if I could change with no other penalty, I probably would. One of the things that you'll notice about the F12 is that from a tire proportion point of view, both the front and rear wheels are 35 series tires, but you've got a 235 up front for, nice narrow tire for steering feel, and then a big fat 315 out of the rear. But because of the aspect ratio being the same, the 315 looks like a balloon off-road tire in the rear compared to the front. So this results in two things. The wheel gap in the front is huge. I mean, it's practically fit my whole fist in there. It'd be nice to close that wheel gap up. And in the rear, I actually think that aesthetically the car could use a 21-inch wheel with a lower profile tire that filled out that rear wheel well a little bit more and made it look more proportional to the front, because the aspect ratios just look dramatically different. Other than that, aesthetically, I really like the way the car looks, so I wouldn't change much there. In terms of other modifications, probably the most common modification you'll see on these cars is exhaust. And I could certainly see doing exhaust. The car is quiet. You'll hear it later. I mean, it's certainly quiet inside. And while I wouldn't want to deal without running catalytic converters, and the car doesn't need any more power, it'd certainly be nice to hear the exhaust a bit more. So changing the exhaust out of certain parts of it is certainly something that I would consider.